Hi everybody, and welcome to RPG Horror Stories with DnD Doge. In today's video, we have a story about a Warhammer game where the Game Master catches two players cheating by reading the sourcebook. A story about a party of murder hobos that crosses a line that the Dungeon Master won't stand for, and much more. But first, let's meditate with Simba to help protect ourselves from the psychic damage that these stories are sure to induce. There we go. Now I think we are ready for some DnD horror stories. Quote, Alpha Gamer ruins the fun for everyone. By Reddit user Warden21. Years ago, I ran a Deathwatch campaign. D100 RPG set in the Warhammer 40k universe. As I'd never run a campaign with this group before, I used the setting that they'd created and started an adventure from one of the source books. The campaign was only designed to be about 10 sessions long, as many of us were dipping our toes into our first ever RPG. The people involved in this merry little adventure were the Dungeon Master, me, an occasionally bumbling but well-intentioned DM. Alpha, the guy in our group who considered himself the de facto leader and had to be the star of the show. He played a Blood Angel Assault Marine, think Space Marine Vampire. Simp, the Alpha's best friend. Were it not for the fact that they were both in relationships, I'd have assumed that Alpha and Simp were in their own relationship, due to Simp's constant fawning all over Alpha. Played a Storm Warden, an Angry Scotsman. Librarian, Psyker. Innocent Bystander number 1. The average normal member of our group, and the only person who was just along for the ride, and happy to be involved in the story. Played a Space Wolf, basically a Viking, Librarian. Innocent Bystander number 2. Another person who just wanted to play. He was friends with Simp, and joined because he heard about it, and always wanted to give it a go. Played an Imperial Fist, think Charlemagne-era Frank, a tactical marine. It all seemed to start well. There were epic battles, cunning investigations, and stealthy insertions into enemy bases. However, on about the third session, I started to notice something. Both Alpha and Simp not only led the interactions with NPCs, but their questioning was a little too perfect. It was almost like they knew not only exactly what to ask, but also exactly what each NPC was going to tell them. So I started to get a bit suspicious. The first thing I did was to introduce a new NPC. To my surprise, not only did Alpha and Simp not lead the engagement, they almost didn't ask any questions at all. I then switched the roles and information for two other NPCs. Cue the visible frustration and anger from both player characters as they realized that something was up. At this point, my suspicions were confirmed. Both players had obtained a copy of the sourcebook and were metagaming. Then I realized that both players were also gearing up for the final battle against the BBEG, tailoring their war gear and skills to take him down hard. So I made a few more tweaks, shifting the faction that the BBEG led, as they had taken a skill that gave rerolls against that faction, and giving it some toughness bonuses at the expense of its armor, as their weapons chosen traded higher armor penetration for damage dealt. And I waited. We come to the final battle, and both of them were floored when I explained the BBEG, and they realized their skills and weapons were not effective. By contrast, the two innocent bystanders who had not min-maxed had a much better time of the fight. At one point, Simp started to complain that this was all wrong and almost admitted that he had read the book, only to be kicked under the table by Alpha. At the end of the session, the team prevailed and the BBEG was dead. I should have known something was up when Alpha suggested that they still had a few sessions left. This was true. The two of them had expedited the roleplay element so much that the planned for 10 sessions only took 8. Alpha also suggested that he DM, as I quote, deserved a chance to play too. I agreed, despite my BS meter tingling. And sure enough, I was right on the money, as my player character got pummeled. Melee bad guys would literally run straight past Simp and the two innocent bystanders to come at me. The shooting bad guys would leave themselves hideously exposed if it meant that they had a shot at me. Worse still, Alpha wrote the ending so that the team died and the entire universe was doomed. It left such a bad taste in everyone's mouth that both the campaign ended and our friend group splintered within a few short weeks. TLDR, while dungeon mastering a campaign with friends, two of them cheat and metagame by reading the source books. When their attempts to cheat are foiled, one of them throws a tantrum, takes over DMing, and ruins it for everyone. Well, OP suspected that Alpha and Simp were using the source books for knowledge, and was pretty clever to put that to the test and switch some things up. And of course, when things weren't by the book, Alpha and Simp had no idea what to do. And then, of course, when Alpha offered to run a game, he would just target OP in stupid ways as some sort of petty revenge, and then ruin everybody else's time by predetermining that the party would lose. I'll never understand why some players cheat in tabletop RPGs. It takes the fun away from it, in my opinion. Even if you do know the source books, it's still fun not to metagame and play it like it should be played, as if the characters don't know what's going to happen. If anything, it kinda ruins the immersion, and that's what we play tabletop RPGs for. Hopefully, OP and the other innocent players were able to find different games and are having a much better time now. Let's move on. Problem player almost kills our entire party. By Reddit user Tears Right Arm. This is the first game of Dungeons & Dragons I've been a part of, and 21 sessions later, I'm in love with my character and the team members, minus one. We have a party of 7. Large size, but our DM does a fantastic job of giving people the spotlight and moving scenes around equally. It consists of 3 rogues, 1 bard paladin warlock, 1 ranger druid, 1 monk barbarian, and the problem player. The problem player was originally a bloodhunter fairy, but I couldn't tell anything was different from a wizard because they didn't use any bloodhunter abilities until 12 sessions in. Okay, that's fine. Everyone roleplays differently. We had just arrived at a magical beanstalk, and some of us wanted to ride to the top as it was growing. Though the dungeon master straight up told us, if you want to ride this up at the speed that it's going, it will be over 10 dex rolls until it reaches its peak, and if you fall, it will be instant death. Okay, fair enough. We don't get on, except for the fairy. During his ascent, we are attacked, but the fairy is 1,500 feet in the air and is not joining the fight. While we are fighting, he is continuously asking when his turn is, but even if he flew down, it would take too long to get to the fight, as each round he ascends higher. We finish the fight, and the fairy reaches the top, where there are 3 orbs that look like doors to another plane. He says he would like to cast Reduce on the orb and place it in the bag of holding. After multiple warnings that this would kill him, playing inside of a plane nuke, he still goes ahead and does it. Cue the chaos, and the orbs disappearing due to the explosion. Nice. Future plot point completely gone. While it was annoying to watch, his character was the only one who died, so we just moved on. It takes him 3 sessions before coming up with a new character, and I feel like an a-hole, but those were the most story progressing and fun sessions I had been a part of. He finally comes to the next session with a Warforged Artificer, and surprisingly, his personality has changed. I let him know after the first session that I really enjoy how he's playing this character, and can tell that he really put some effort into the background. Later that night, the other players told me that this happens often. When one of his character dies, he comes back with a more somber and serious character, but devolves into the being of mischief. A couple of sessions later, he gets a pair of dice from the God of Chaos. Roll 2d6, and as long as they are not double ones, what he asks for happens. I'm wary at this point, but can't forcibly take the dice from his character. Whoa, that seems a tad overpowered. The Dungeon Master basically gave him the wish spell, with a near 0% chance of not working. Let's see how this plays out. We find a general that we need to kill from an opposing faction, and lure them into a trap against some stone giants. While waiting for the giants to whittle down the general's numbers, he starts rolling the bone dice, saying, "I want to kill one of the giants." It's basically instant death for the stone giant. Out of character, we ask why he did that, because that was the exact opposite of our plan. And he says, "For the XP." We've had multiple talks with this player about player knowledge and character knowledge, and push him, asking how his character knows what XP is. He eventually relents and says, "Well, my character wants you guys to think he is cool." Again, we ask, by doing the opposite of the plan we agreed on? The character just laughs and says, "Yes." At this point, everyone at the table is tired of this and joins the fight. During the fight, the Warforged rolls the bone dice and says, "I want this fight to be over." The God of Chaos asks, "What would you consider to be over?" And he answers, "Everyone dead except my friends." His turret grows in size after the dice roll, and our Dungeon Master states, "Name ally combatants," as the turret's AI. He just stares at the DM, because he doesn't know any of our characters' names. He calls a couple of our characters our actual names, forgets about all 8 of the small army of NPCs we have with us, and calls the last person something not even close to their characters' names, like Amber instead of Anastasia. At this point, I'm actually upset because something out of my control is going to get my character killed, along with all my friends' player characters killed. One of the other players starts whispering the names until all enemies are dead, along with all the NPC allies. Immediately after the fight is over, the barbarian monk attacks him 3 times and knocks him down to 8 HP, while the others surround him. He rolls the bone dice and asks for us to be his friends. Then, some godlike power stays our hands from killing him. It left a pretty sour taste for all of us. Next, he tells us it's getting late and he needs to go home an hour early. And this wasn't an, "Oh, I effed up and need to leave." He was super jovial and laughing while leaving. I don't know if my ranting is warranted, or if we are all a-holes, but I feel like I needed to vent into the ether, because it's killing me having to wait until next session to talk about this with the other players. Now, while this player does seem to be a bit of a problem player, and seems to not really care about the other players' ideas, or what they should do to work together, or just the players in general. I mean, I get people can be bad with names, but you would think after multiple sessions, he would eventually be able to at least remember their names. I think that the main problem here is the Dungeon Master facilitating this player's behavior. Why the heck would you give a player like this an item that basically allows them to cast the wish spell with such a low chance of failure? I mean, I've heard of overpowered magic items before, but these dice are something else. By the sounds of it, there wasn't even a rule to them that they can only be used once per long rest. Hopefully, the next time the group gets together, the other players can air their concerns, and then the Dungeon Master will realize that those dice were probably not the best idea. On to the next one. Dungeons & Dragons Party Crosses the Line by Reddit user StunningCut199. So yeah, long story short, I'm never playing with these dudes again. This was my first time dungeon mastering. It was about 2 to 3 years ago, right as the pandemic was waning. I got super into D&D lore and campaign crafting during the pandemic after years of just being a player, so I shot my shot at the game store. I started up a space-themed D&D campaign. I didn't use the Spelljammer preset campaign, but I did take influences from it. The players were largely locals from the game shop. I didn't really know them super well outside of the shop. They all knew each other fairly well though. So we had our session 0 and went over the theme of the campaign and what was and was not allowed. They rolled up a human fighter, an elf oathbreaker paladin, an Aarakocra ranger, and an orc rogue. The human fighter was kind of the leader of the party, and the biggest that guy of the campaign. As we got into the game, I slowly began to realize that I was dealing with a party of murder hobos and sex pests. Anyone, including allied NPCs vital to their mission, or just random civilians who so much as looked at them wrong, would get their skulls bashed in. And any planet we landed on, they would ravage towns, encampments, etc., and act like a bunch of murderous, horny medieval knights with no moral compass whatsoever. 2 party members did end up getting killed though throughout the campaign. The only person they actually listened to was the Duke of one of the main planets, who had them do his bidding. And of course, they chose the most evil Duke they could connect with to get their quests from. But all of that pales in comparison to the tavern scene that ended the campaign. They went to a small tavern on a hollowed out asteroid. The tavern owner was a human male whose daughter worked with him. The party came in as they had just gotten done fighting a horde of Star Lancers that attacked their Spelljammer. As they were coming in, Aarakocra Ranger started hitting on the tavern owner's daughter. The tavern owner said, "Leave my daughter alone, you ruffians, she's only 13. Aarakocra kept going, so I told him that I'm not comfortable having to roleplay flirtation between him and someone who is that young. Human Fighter tried to argue and said, "Stop being a pussy, it's just a game." I said, "Yes, it is a game, but we did set some limits in session 0, this being one of them. It's just the rules of the game." This is where things go real bad. Human Fighter then just says, "There are no rules today. I shoved that old geezer into the wall. Boys, grab him." So the party easily knocked him out, as he was a civilian. Human Fighter then gave him a potion and bound and gagged him and said, "You're gonna watch." The party all look at each other and grin as Human Fighter says, "Let's roll initiative, boys. I seize the girl and pin her down on the bar table. I rip off her dress and then..." I then say, "No, you either stop right now or I'm removing you from the table." The party then shouted me down, and Human Fighter said, "Let's put this to a vote." And then the party voted to do that. So I said, "Nope, I'm not running this crap. Goodbye." And I promptly left the table. I did return to the game store though, and eventually did start a new campaign with some friends from college who were at least willing to give D&D a try. But that first campaign was definitely, by far, the most disgusting experience I've ever had with this game. I have DM'd since though, with much better groups. It certainly seemed like OP had their hands full with this party. And I'm sure when OP was planning out this campaign, they didn't have an evil campaign in mind. But it seems like that is what the players had in mind, and OP seemed to just accept it and roll with the punches, as I'm sure running evil campaigns could be just as fun as running normal ones. But when the players decided to cross a boundary that was set in session 0, even with the one player stating that there are no rules today, I say good on OP for putting a stop to it and just walking away from the table. The moment the players did that, they showed a blatant disregard to the person running the game for them, and only cared about living out some sort of sick fantasy. I swear, a lot of creeps try to use D&D as a way to indulge in some sick crap. And again, good on OP for not putting up with it. It is good to hear that this didn't turn OP away from running games, and it sounds like they have run some good ones since, this time with non-psychotic players. Let's move on, but before we do, this next story is actually an update from the story about the Dungeon Master forcing a player to be a werewolf from my previous video. So if you haven't seen that one and want to check it out, I'll try to remember to leave a link to that video in the description. But with that said, let's find out what happened. Update of: the DM made my character the werewolf all along. I did not know. By Reddit user Lower Caregiver 2410. Some of you asked for an update, so here it is. Had to rewrite it before posting, after calming down, to make it more readable. Long story short, the ranger knew about it. It was a plan to get rid of the rogue, so I left the table. Barbarian did the same. The long story. So I had written down all the things I wanted to ask and say, and thanks to you all, I had a list full of options and possible compromises, so I thought I was completely prepared. I first gave that talk, which you recommended, about how I thought it was a nice idea, but that the execution was a bit unpleasant for me, because this way I couldn't play my character the way I expected. That I didn't feel completely comfortable with how my backstory was suddenly different, and I'm not sure how to play the character without knowing her background. And I said that I hoped for a different choice besides kill the party or be killed by them. So to get an idea we all could agree with, I wanted to start with 2 questions. 1. When did you decide my character is a werewolf? And 2. Can we go through what you have now as my backstory? After I did that whole speech, the Dungeon Master started to give some strange excuses and stories about how he had this in plan for a while, but each time he didn't know how to approach it in the campaign, until he talked to Ranger about it and he gave this idea. Ranger then took over and told me that this way it would suit his backstory and get me to have a, quote, spectacular ending as that character. This got Barbarian mad, saying things like, "So it was not planned? You singled her out and lied about it? And why the hell do you want to get rid of her that bad? What's wrong with you?" The Dungeon Master turned red and said, "Don't be so angry and let us finish." And she did. Dungeon Master and Ranger both explained that in their previous campaign, they had an annoying rogue who always wanted to be the center of attention and often got the party into trouble. Dungeon Master assumed that I'm not like that, so when I first indicated that I wanted to play a rogue, he agreed. But after he had talked about it with Ranger and Wizard, they started to doubt whether they wanted a rogue in the party after all. So that's where the whole "why not play a paladin" came from before we started. I was certainly not as annoying in the game as the previous rogue, and they admitted that. But Ranger and DM still didn't enjoy playing with a rogue, because they still got annoyed by the rogue traits. They found it annoying that I often looted and defeated enemies, and was often the one who opened the most chests. I thought that's normal for rogues, like I'm the one that picks the locks, and most of what I found I would also share with them all. But okay, I let them keep talking. So much later in the campaign, they came up with a plan, the whole werewolves plot twist, so that my character died and I would have to make another one. After the Dungeon Master would say that I was not allowed to choose rogue again, because, quote, "After everything, the party now no longer trusts any rogues in the game." Before that plan was made, the daughter of the person who gave us the quest was supposed to be the werewolf all along. That's why there were no hints or clues that it was me, because it wasn't decided until the last minute, and they had hoped that I would not ask questions, like I was doing now. After this whole speech from their side, I really didn't know what to say anymore. I was pissed that they really targeted me and my character, and sad that I'd been lied to. If they had just said, "Hey, it looks like you want to play a rogue, but we prefer not to have one in the party," after the annoying player we had last time, I would have just chosen something else, it would have not been a problem, and this would have never happened. So I left the table, and after some shouting, Barbarian did too. Wizard, later on, sent me a message that he was sorry that this happened. He knew that they were planning something, but didn't know that it was this. Dungeon Master sent me a message asking if I would reconsider, and Barbarian got the same. I sent him, quote, "Next time just write a book." Bard does not know what to do, but kind of wants to leave since we are gone, but at the same time, really likes D&D, so he fears that he would regret leaving after not even really playing. Monk and Ranger have been very silent. Edit. Monk just contacted me. He felt really bad, and he kept silent because he thought I would blame him too. He texted the group that he wants to leave the table. Edit 2. Monk joined Barbarian and me. We will be doing one-shot soon, and I will be starting with one in the Feywild. Yeah, that is a bunch of BS. First, pulling that crap with OP's character just because you didn't like there being a rogue in the party, and then lying about it right to their face. I don't blame OP and the others for leaving the table, as the DM and player trust was broken. And I agree it would have just been better for the Dungeon Master to explain why he didn't want a rogue in the party before the game began. That way, OP would not have wasted her time building one and writing a backstory for them. It's good to hear that OP and some of the other players are going to continue playing Dungeons & Dragons, and start out with one-shots. And this story just shows that communication and honesty are keystones in any tabletop RPG. But that is all I have for you today. As always, I appreciate all of you, and may your games remain horror story free. Until next time.